All right. Thank you all. Thank you guys for that lovely video. That was very sweet. You sure know how to make me feel special, and I appreciate that. All right. I want you to grab your Bibles, though, because today, it might be my birthday tomorrow. For some of you, you're like, is it Halloween? Yeah, that answers a lot, okay? So it started early, the weird. But today, I don't want you to focus anything on me. I really want us to get focused on Christ. And so let's do that together. I want you to get into Acts chapter 13 and find verse 13 there. So Acts chapter 13 and verse 13. So about 19 years ago, I started in Bible college. I had a pastor that was just pushing me to get into Bible college. I'm glad he did. It was a wonderful time. I started out, I did 2 semesters over at Boyce College, which is part of Southern Theological Seminary. It's the undergraduate portion. And I was there for a couple of semesters, and then had an opportunity to bring my girls into my home. They were 10 and 2 at the time. And then my wife got pregnant. And guess who couldn't keep driving all the way out to Frankfort Avenue or whatever every day from LaGrange? It was just too much. So I decided I was going to have to do something different. Now listen, by the way, for some of you who are like, wait a second, you're part of Southern, I just want to be really, really clear. I am not a Calvinist. I don't care what anybody else says. When any teacher ever said, I'm not a Calvinist and I'd be a Calvinist. And if you're a Calvinist, come talk to me after service today. I'd love to have a conversation. But I won't be one. That's beyond the point. So I started at this correspondence school, and it was really helpful. They had this really great program where they said, hey, look, they weren't interested in money. They were not trying to, we had to pay something, but it was like nominal. They just said their whole mission of the school, it's Bethany Divinity College and Seminary. It's out of Alabama. And they said their whole mission was that they just wanted to equip men and women for the ministry. And so I thought that was great. And then even better, they said they understood if you were probably coming to that. This was before online school, so I used to have to print out my stuff and mail it in correspondence. And they said if you're going to do this long distance learning, you probably have a pretty hectic schedule. So they did us all a big favor, and they gave us 6 months to finish a subject. We would get a subject, and they said you have 6 months to get that subject done. And I utilized that because I had 2 girls in my house and a pregnant wife and then a new baby. And then 2 years came and went. And I didn't have an associate's. I didn't have anything after 2 years of school. And so I was like, my goodness, Sarah, I don't know what, I was talking to my wife. I said, Sarah, I don't know what I'm going to do. I said, I think I just need to just set aside a time every day. And I did. I just decided I'm going to set aside a time every day for me that was early in the morning and then in the evening. It was going to be my time that I would do nothing but schoolwork. But the problem was life. It was like, you ever have this? Like every time you said, I'm going to do this. It's going to, at 7 a.m., nothing's going to interrupt me. But then there'd be a child who was throwing up and I'm holding hair in a bucket overnight. That was a good visual. I probably didn't need to do that. But you get what I'm saying. There'd be an overnight deal. I'd be up all night with the kids. And so I couldn't get up and do schoolwork the next day or whatever it was. A pipe would break and I'm working on my house, or something would happen and something would happen with somebody in the youth group because I was youth pastor and I'd have to go out with them or whatever it might have been. It was always something. And so 3 years goes by and I still don't have an associate's degree and I'm not very close. And I was just fussing to my wife. I said, Sarah, I don't really know what I'm going to do. It'll be a decade before I even get an associate's degree. This seems like this might be futile. And she said, no. She said, it's not futile. She said, your problem is you set aside your time, but you're not dedicated to it. She said, you've set the time. You said you're going to do it, but then you don't. You let any and everything else, whether it's a birthday party or something that needs to be fixed or whatever, you let everything else get in between it. She said, here's the agreement we're going to make. Before you quit school, because that was what was in my head, was maybe I just don't need to be in school. She said, before you quit, here's what I want you to do. She said, I want you to dedicate yourself every day. I will not interrupt you. Whatever that time is, no phone calls, no kids, no discipline, no fixing the house, no anything. It doesn't matter what it is. You're going to dedicate yourself during that time. And for the next 7 years of my life, I dedicated from 5 a.m. to 7 a.m. and then from 8 p.m. until about 11. That was my dedicated time every day, 7 days a week. And sure enough, it took me 7 years after that mark, but I ended up with a master's degree at the end of that. And I'm telling you that to give you this, to say this lesson that I think in the Christian, this mic is just not working today. I don't know what to do about it. Sorry, guys. In the Christian life, I think we've done exactly that same thing. We set it aside That's holy, right? That's what holy is, to be set apart. We set it aside and we say, yes, Lord, that's what we're going to do. We feel the Lord's call and we say, I'm going to do that. And then we let everything else get in the way. I know I'm talking to some of you right now. That we feel the Lord calling us. Some of you feel the Lord calling you to finally take a step in belief. Some of you feel the Lord calling you to be baptized. Some of you feel a calling into the ministry, and you keep letting everything else get in the way of what God's calling you to do. I'm going to show you this today out of Acts chapter 13 about how to get focused and what to be focused on. Do you have Acts chapter 13? Amen. Look at verse 13. And when Paul and his party set sail from Paphos, they came to Perga in Pamphylia. Now read this. And John, departing from them, returned to Jerusalem. But when they departed from Perga, they came to Antioch in Pisidia, and they went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day, and they sat down. And after the reading of the law and the prophets, the rulers of the synagogue sent to them, saying, Men and brethren, if you have any word of exhortation for the people, say on. And then Paul stood up and motioning with his hand said, Men of Israel, and you who fear God, listen, the God of this people, Israel, chose our fathers and exalted the people when they dwelt as strangers in the land of Egypt. And with an uplifted arm, he brought them out of it. Now for a time, about 40 years, he put up with their ways in the wilderness. And when he had destroyed 7 nations in the land of Canaan, he distributed their land to them by allotment. And after that, he gave them judges for about 450 years until Samuel the prophet. And afterwards, they asked for a king. And so God gave them Saul, the son of Kish, a man of the tribe of Benjamin, for 40 years. And when he had removed him, he raised up for them David as king, to whom also he gave testimony and said, I have found David, the son of Jesse, a man after my own heart, who will do all my will. From this man's seed, according to the promise, God raised up for Israel a Savior, Jesus. After John had first preached before his coming the baptism of repentance to all the people of Israel, and as John was finishing his course, he said, Who do you think I am? I am not he, but behold, excuse me, I lost my spot there. There comes one after me, the sandals of whose feet I am not worthy to loose. Men and brethren, sons of the family of Abraham, and those among you who fear God, to you the word of this salvation has been sent. For those who dwell in Jerusalem and their rulers, because they did not know him, nor even the voices of the prophets, which are read every Sabbath, have fulfilled them in condemning him. And though they found no cause for death in him, they asked Pilate that he should be put to death. Now when they had fulfilled all that was written concerning him, they took him down from the tree and laid him in a tomb. But God raised him from the dead. He was seen for many days by those who came up with him from Galilee to Jerusalem, who are his witnesses to the people. And we declare to you glad tidings. That promise which was made to the fathers, God has fulfilled this for us, their children, in that he has raised up Jesus, as it is also written in the 2nd Psalm, You are my son, today I have begotten you. And that he raised him from the dead no more to return to corruption. He has spoken thus, I will give you the sure mercies of David. Therefore he also says in another psalm, you will not allow your Holy One to see corruption. For David, after he had served his own generation by the will of God, fell asleep, was buried with his fathers, and saw corruption. But he whom God raised up saw no corruption. Therefore, let it be known to you, brethren, that through this man is preached to you the forgiveness of sins. And by him, everyone who believes is justified from all things from which you could not be justified by the law of Moses. Beware therefore, lest what has been spoken of in the prophets come upon you. Behold, you despisers, marvel and perish. For I work a work in your days, a work which you will by no means believe, though one were to declare it to you. Let's go to the Lord in prayer about this. Heavenly Father, Lord, there's a lot of text here and there's a lot to go over. Would you please speak in this place? Father, we want to encounter you. We've come here to encounter you. Father, right now, you know our hearts. You know that there's people right here, right now, people watching online right now, people who'll watch this in the future. Father, you've been calling unto us, and we've been letting anything and everything else get in the way of that. Father, would you help us to hear your call today? I pray even now at the beginning of this sermon, Father, I pray that you would draw men and women, boys and girls, young and old. Father, I pray that you'd call them unto yourself. May your name be glorified today, Father. Work in us, do a miraculous work in us in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, now look back at verse 13. You see this. Now when Paul and his party set sail from Paphos. Remember what was at Paphos, right? The church had went from defensive to offensive. You remember that? Say amen. They went from defensive to offensive. They had set out with these two guys. The church commissioned these two guys. They ordained them, laid hands on them, prayed for them, fasted for them, and sent them out. That's Paul and Barnabas are being sent out from the church of Antioch. Antioch is home church. That's home base. I hope Salt and Light gets to be Antioch one day. I want to be sending you all out. That's what we ought to be doing. And so, listen, Antioch sends them out, and they go out, they meet, they run into their first encounter. Remember Bar Jesus? Just shake your head, yes? Yeah, remember Bar Jesus? And then there was Sergius. Sergius became a believer. Bar Jesus ends up walking around blind and seeking somebody to lead him by the hand. The church has now seen its first success story. That wasn't, not that they hadn't had success stories in the past. Obviously, people have been changed, people have been believing, but it's all been because of circumstance. This is the first time that the church had taken an offensive stance. They're not reacting to what Rome is doing. They're not reacting to what the Jews are doing in Jerusalem. They are acting on their own, saying, we want to go out and lead people to Jesus. And after they've said that, we want to build the kingdom. We want to lead people to Jesus. We want to build the church. If you're confused, by the way, when we talk about Paul's missionary journey, that's what he's going to do. Lead people to Jesus, start a church. Go to another city, lead people to Jesus, start a church. That's how he's going to do it. And they go into this first place, and there's this guy, Bar Jesus, and there's Sergius. Sergius becomes a believer. Success. They should be jumping for joy. Look what happens. Look what happens in the story. I'm right there in verse 13. They sailed from Paphos. They came to Perga and Pamphylia. And what happens? What's it say? John, departing from them, returned to Jerusalem. I will spend absolutely no time trying to decipher why John decided to leave. I can tell you, because it's in the Word, that Paul gets so upset with John for leaving, probably rightfully so. By the way, this is John. John's not a bad guy. He's not an enemy. John writes books of the Bible. This is the same John that's in the Bible. This is 1 John, 2 John, 3 John. This is the Gospel of John. This is John. John left. In 2 chapters, Paul is going to be so mad when he tries to go on his second missionary journey, he won't let John go with him. He'll end up in a fight with Barnabas because John wants to go with him, and Paul says, nope, John can't go again. Here's what I love, though, about this particular text. John left. It's going to upset Paul that he left. Look at this, though. What's it say? It says that John departed from them and he returned to Jerusalem. And then look at verse 14. And when they departed from Perga, they came to Antioch in Pisidia. Not the same Antioch, that's a different Antioch in Pisidia. And they went into the synagogue. You know how much dedication was given to John leaving and Paul getting mad about it? One sentence. John left. As a matter of fact, we don't really even know that Paul's mad until we get a little later and find out that he won't let him come back. I want everybody to give me your attention because this is the first thing about being focused, and I need everybody to hear this one. If you're going to miss everything else, get this one. We spend way too much time letting what other people do dictate what we do. We spend way too much time because somebody offended us, somebody hurt us, somebody said something we don't like, somebody didn't do something the way we wanted to do it, that all of a sudden we're not listening to the call that God's putting on us. You're letting too many people have free rent in your mind. You're letting too many people dictate because of their actions what you're doing with your actions. I'm going to tell you a story. There was a guy came to church years ago. This is like, I don't know, had to have been 10 years ago now, 8 or 10 years ago. He comes to church, visits for one time. We're a tiny church. If there was a visitor, we were like Cars. Y'all ever seen the movie Cars? It's like a desert town, and then if somebody drove by, they're like, Places! That was us. We were like, come on, Places, there's a car in here. And then they actually parked and got out. Sometimes they just turn around the parking lot, and that was a disappointing day. But this guy like gets out of his car, and he tells me that he's a missionary he wants to be a missionary. The Lord's called him to be a missionary to go to India. And I was like, that's awesome. We want to be a part of missions. Like, we're this tiny little church. I think our budget, like at the time, our budget for the whole year was like $25,000 or $26,000 for the whole year. Like, that was how we were paying rent. That was everything. I was like, we don't have a lot of money. We don't have a whole lot that we could give, but I'd love to meet with you and talk to you about the mission. And he said, oh yeah, I'd love to meet with you. And so I go and I meet this guy, and he just gives me all these crazy statistics, good statistics about why it would be good for him to go to India. He's talking about the faith that's in India. He's talking about what's happening there, what's happening with the church there. That was all good, great testimony there. And he starts talking about how he feels the Lord calling him to start discipleship and even start schools, maybe even start a college in India. And I'm like, that's awesome. This sounds like something we would love to come alongside you in some way. We want to be a missional church. And by the way, we want to be a missional church. We want to be a missions-minded church. This is not all there is to church in here. We want to be outside of these walls, and missions is a way to do that. We want to be evangelizing and doing missions. I said, we want to be a part of that. And he said, you guys are pretty small. We're looking at a big project here. I said, okay, well, what's the next step for you? Like, maybe we could help out in some way. Like, what's the next thing? And he said, well, we're really trying to get in with the International Mission Board. Okay. And I said, what happens if you get in with the International Mission Board, then they're going to take it on, but what happens if you don't? He said, we've been thinking about like maybe Samaritan's Purse. Okay. So you have call on your life to go to India. You want to get the International Mission Board to take hold of this, but if they don't, then possibly Samaritan's Purse, and what happens if they don't? What's the next step for you? He said, there's a couple of others. There's Christ First City International, and there's this, and he starts naming some other missions organizations, and I said, okay, but what happens if you don't, what happens if none of them take hold? What happens, what are you gonna do? And this is what he said. We're sitting at the table, and he said, I guess I'll have to rethink if I'm called to India. Wait, his call to India was based on whether or not the International Mission Board would take the same. God didn't call the International Mission Board. I mean, maybe he did, but in our conversation, God's calling this guy. And he's letting whether or not he's going to go to India be based upon whether or not the International Mission Board takes on his mission. Do you understand what I'm saying to you for a moment, friends? If you're really called to something, I don't care who goes along with you, you go. Hey, here's the real truth for you. You'll either go by will or you'll go by whale. You'll figure that out. Hey, listen, we're letting too many people, what they do, what someone else, what the church does or doesn't do. God, will you hear this? God's not just calling, he's not just calling me. He's not just calling Salt and Light. He's calling you. There's a guy named George Whitefield. He was a preacher back in the 1700s. I want to be a George Whitefield. That guy, he was preaching. The Lord just anointed him, and he began to pray, and the Lord began to anoint his preaching, and people were coming. And he was in England. There was a state church there in England. I mean, it wasn't like what we have now. And as he's dealing with the church and he's trying to preach, people are coming, but the church is getting mad at him. And so there's some churches, he's an evangelist, and some churches won't even let the guy come in and preach. There was a church that he went and preached at, and there was 1,000 people waiting outside of the church because they couldn't get seats. And the church was so mad that the church was so mad there in England, the church was getting so mad, they were barring him from preaching in certain places. So he had the Lord calling it, just laying on his life to go out, and he started what was called open air preaching. He would just go out in a field, go out somewhere, and he would just start preaching. He would look for the most vile and wretched places. He'd look for the places that nobody else would go. And one of the first places he went in Bristol was he went down to a coal mine and started preaching outside of a coal mine. The story goes that men were coming out of the mine. People were coming from the town. They were literally surrounding him, and they said that tears were coming down their face. And you could see the clean lines in the coal-covered faces of these miners as the tears were dripping down their face. One time, George Whitefield set up his little podium in a field across from a circus. He just started preaching. The circus had people all over. There was all kinds of talent in the circus, and George Whitefield started preaching, and the people started leaving the circus and coming over to hear George Whitefield preach. And you would think like that's success, right? You know what happened? The people of the circus got so mad that he was taking their crowd that they came over, and if I read it correctly, if the story is true, they were throwing rotten fruit at him, throwing mud at him, and they chopped up cats and they were throwing dead cat parts at him. You know what George Whitefield did? He went back the next day and preached again. Friends, I want to be a George Whitefield. Listen, do you hear what I'm trying to tell you? I don't care what somebody else did to you or said to you, how they reacted to you. If God's calling you, you want to follow that. If God's calling you to be baptized, listen, I'm going to say this real hard. I know that some in your family are going to think weird of you. If God's calling you to be baptized, come be baptized. If God's calling you to make a decision for him, make a decision for him. If God's calling you to ministry, go into ministry. Friends, if God's calling you to mission, you don't need me to knight you. You are knighted. Jesus Christ is in you, and it's his call, not my call. I hope you're hearing what I'm saying today. Listen to this. Look what happens next. Sorry about this mic. Look what happens next, though. It says that they went to Antioch and Pisidia, and they sat down at the synagogue, and it was the Sabbath day when they sat down, and it's after the reading of the law and the prophets. The rulers of the synagogue sent to them saying, men and brethren, if you have any word of exhortation for the people, say on. Wait a second, what just happened? This is a synagogue. Y'all understand a synagogue. There's Jewish religion, Jewish faith happening. So Paul, this is going to be his kind of MO. This is how he'll do it. He goes into a city, and then he would go into the synagogue. Why would he go into the synagogue? Because he was a Pharisee. Does everybody understand that? Paul used to be a Pharisee. He was a high official in the Jewish faith. So when he would go into the synagogue, they would, like what you just saw here, they'd give him an opportunity to speak. He's looking for those opportunities to speak. He goes into the synagogue knowing that there's a good chance they're going to do exactly what they just did. They sent to him. Did you see that? When they get done reading the law and the prophets, the rulers of the synagogue sent to them. They sought them out and said, men and brethren, if you have any word of exhortation for the people, say on. And Paul does this. I love what he does. He stands up in the midst of them, and look what he starts doing. He relates to them right where they are. He motions with his hand and he says, men of Israel, you who fear God, listen, the God of this people Israel, he chose our fathers and exalted the people when they were strangers in the land of Egypt, and he, with an uplifted arm, and he brought them out of it. There was a time of about 40 years. And then he put up with their ways in the wilderness. And when he had destroyed 7 nations, I'm just paraphrasing. I'm going to paraphrase that for a second and say, do you see what he's doing? They had just read the law and the prophets. And now what's Paul speaking into? The law and the prophets. He says, hey, remember here's the history of Israel, and here's what's happening in Israel. And look at what he does, though. I need you to pay attention to this. Look what he does. He works them down. He says he destroyed the 7 nations. And then in verse 20, he says he gave them judges for 450 years. This is all Old Testament history. He says he gives them Samuel and the prophets. And afterward, they ask for a king. He gives them Saul of Kish. And he's the man of the tribe of Benjamin. And he gave him, God gave Israel Saul for 40 years. And then in verse 22, when he had removed him, he raised up to them. Now pay attention. He raised up to them David. He's got the testimony that David, he's the son of Jesse. All these things the Jews are going to agree with. That's right. Yeah, Saul and David, they love this part. Look what he does. He says, David's a man. God said, this is a man after my own heart. He'll do my will. But look at verse 23. From this man's seed, according to the promise, God raised up for Israel. What's it say? No, wait, do you see what he just did? He related to them right where they are. And look at where he led them. What's it say? He says, God raised up for Israel. Say it out loud, real loud. What's it say? Okay, y'all have the answer. It's a Savior. Ready? We're going to say it together because some of y'all going to sleep. God raised up what? Savior. And then he says, I love these little lines right beside it. What's it say? Who's the Savior? Jesus. He led right through the law and the prophets. And he led them right to Jesus. Friends, I want everybody to catch this focus. I don't care where you are. I mean, I care where you are. But it doesn't matter what the situation is. In all things, I'm telling you, God wants us focused on Christ. If you're talking about political things, God wants it focused on Christ. If you're talking about your school, God wants it focused on Christ. If If you're talking about your work, God wants it focused on Christ. This is the thing that is missing because we let other things get in the way, making us think that somehow it's not about Christ. Well, friends, Paul just took them right through the law and the prophets. They've read the law and the prophets, and what's he do? Leads them right to Christ. There was a situation years ago, maybe 5-6 years ago. I was on a mission trip, and there was this young man, and he was going to have the opportunity to preach. They asked him to preach, and there was all these young people, and this young man is going to get to preach. The crowd, it's probably like 200 or 300 kids. There's a crowd like this size, but they're all kids. And they had asked this young guy, he was like 18 years old, or he's about 18, and they asked him if he would preach because they said he could relate to the kids. And so he started to preach. He did. I remember the sermon. He stood up, and his sermon was fear. As an acronym. By the way, for some of you who have heard this sermon, because I've heard plenty of other people preach it, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to dog on one of your sermons if you think it's a great sermon, but I'm just going to tell you that I had a huge problem with it. He gives his sermon as fear. False evidence appearing real. Those were his points. It's fear, it's false evidence appearing real. And he went through points about all the times in the Bible that God tells us not to fear. And he went through the statistics of people who are afraid of certain things and then nothing ever comes of it. He talked about anxiety and he talked about depression, and then he prayed with us and everybody cheered. All the adults came up to him after and they hugged on him and they told him what a great job that he did. And we got in the car, and it was me and my wife Sarah. We were in our car, and she was telling me how great she thought it was, how great of a job he did. He told funny stories and had some good jokes and really related. He really connected with the kids. And then she looked at the look on my face, and she goes, "By the look on your face, I don't think that you agree." And I went, I don't agree. She said, "Well, what don't you agree with?" She said, the Bible says not to fear. And I said, "Oh, absolutely." I said, "I think my problem is that there was 200 or 300 kids there, and he didn't say 2 words about Jesus." I said, "Here's what I want you to think." This is what I told her. I was talking to Sarah. I was like, "Sarah, I want you to think this." I said, "Here's what I want you to think. If those kids give him the number one thing that he was talking to them about, if the best of the best could come from what he led them to, what do they walk away saying? I shouldn't be depressed, I shouldn't have anxiety, or I shouldn't be fearful. But if they don't know Christ, friends, they've missed the whole thing. I'm trying to tell you as clearly as I can, God wants you focused on Christ. That's where he wants your attention. No matter what the situation, if you're in the Jewish synagogue, it points to Christ. If you're in your job, it can point to Christ. Jesus is in all. He is all in all. And you don't have to miss him. You're allowing everything else to be a distraction from what God is calling you to, which is his own son. It's always been his son. And it's not just that he points them to Jesus, because he gets really pointed with this. Look at what he says. He says, God raised up for Israel a Savior, Jesus. Now, he did this after John the Baptist was preaching the baptism of repentance. I'm going to skip down to verse 26. I'm taking you through the text. You're in Acts 13 and verse 26. Men and brethren, sons of the family of Abraham, and those among you who fear God, to you the word of this salvation has been sent. For those who dwell in Jerusalem and their rulers, because they did not know him, nor even the voices of the prophets, which are read every Sabbath, have fulfilled them in condemning him. Just look at me for a second. Give me your attention. Do you understand what he just said? He just said that God has fulfilled this salvation because the Jewish rulers who had Jesus in their presence, they didn't recognize him and they condemned him to death. You know, Jesus hung on a cross, right? They did that. They condemned him to death, not realizing that in their condemning him, they were actually fulfilling all the things God said they would do. God said they would reject him. God said that they were going to kill him. God said that they weren't going to accept him. God had already said it. What they didn't realize is when Jesus came and they rejected him and hung him on a cross, they were fulfilling everything that God had said. But look what happens next. It says that they condemned him. And in verse 28, although they found no cause of death in him, they asked Pilate that he should be put to death. And now when they had fulfilled all that was written concerning him, that's in the prophets, they took him down from the tree and they laid him in a tomb. Verse 30, but God raised him from the dead. I need everybody to give me this one. Jesus Christ came to this earth. Even though the Jews didn't recognize him as the Savior, he is the Son of God. They condemned him. They hung him on a cross. They killed him. They put him in a tomb. And 3 days later, he rose from the grave. That is the gospel. Friends, you have to understand that the part of Christ that you need is that he died for you, he was buried, and he rose for you. Let me explain why you need that. Because in his death, he paid your price. Did you notice in the middle there, that's in verse 28, that they found no cause of death in him? Did you notice that? Maybe you didn't. I'm asking you a question. Y'all didn't know I was like really asking. I get it. That was a bad question. I'm asking you to respond because it's easier for me to keep going when I know you're not asleep. In verse 28, he says they found no cause of death in him. Did you notice that? Why would God point out that there was no cause of death for Christ, but yet they killed him anyways? Everybody give me this. Because he's sinless. When Christ died, he died in your place because we're sinners. That's the crux of the matter. We are sinners who deserve death, but Jesus, the Son of God, he came to this earth. Though he never sinned, he knew no sin, they crucified him as if he was a sinner. He took your punishment on himself. And he died. That's what sin brings, is death. And the Son of God died for you. They put him in a tomb, but what happened? Death couldn't hold him. He got up out of the grave. What if Christ can die in your place, then what does it mean if he rises? He rose for you. You can live a different life, a resurrected life, because Jesus died and rose for you. His death counts for you, then so does his resurrection. And that means you don't have to live in the messed up, miry sin that you've been in. He'll give you a new life. Hey, how do you get actual deliverance? In Jesus who died for you and rose again. You want away from the bottle? Jesus will get you there. You want away from the porn? Some of you guys think you can't get away from it. Yes, you can. You have Christ inside of you. You can get away from that. He's the chain breaker. Hey, some of you think it's just your habit. Some of you have a problem with lying or gossip. Your tongue can be controlled because Jesus rose for you. That's a new life. You don't have to walk around in an old life. You can have a new life because he died for you and he rose. A few weeks ago, I went on a little vacation. When I came back, I was getting ready to deal with the onslaught of text messages that I had been ignoring. And some of you are like, he did ignore them. Well, sometimes I was on vacation, y'all. I'm just trying. And I'm like looking through my text and I'm walking down the steps and I hear Titus go, Dad, the basement's flooding. Oh no. And then I round the steps. I'm going to go down. Like I'm like on the steps. I'm kind of rushing and I could smell it. Septic. It wasn't just flooding. Septic flooding. Yeah. Coming out of the toilet, coming out of the drain. It was just awful. I mean, it's just filling up my basement floor. And I tried. Like, I went and got my muck boots on, and I get the plunger, and like as it's like pouring, I told all the kids, like, turn off all the water, stop running the water. And then I'm down there with the plunger, and I'm like plunging the toilet, I'm plunging the stupid drain, and I couldn't get anything to move. And so I thought, okay, I'm gonna snake it. I have like this old rusty snake, and that's what I really want to do is snake out a toilet. So I'm gonna try. I don't really know how to use a snake. I kind of know how, but it's probably gonna mess something up. And I'm like, whatever, like what do I have to lose right now? So I'm like cramming the snake down there, nothing. I thought, okay, I got a grand idea. I'm gonna go out back and I'm gonna get into the septic and go in the pipe from the outside. That's lovely. Listen, hey, y'all, young men, that's what dads do, okay? Sometimes we got to take the stuff nobody else wants. And so I go out and I like take off the lid and I'm trying to I've got my hands up in it and I'm trying to snake it up through there. Y'all like, that's gross. That wasn't in the video. And so I'm like snaking the pipe from the other side and nothing, couldn't get anything. So I finally buckled and I called a plumber. Yeah, after all that, I called a plumber and so the plumber came out and and we're inside, and I'm trying to tell him. I tried to clean up a little before he got there. It was like an emergency plumber, and he before he got there, I'm trying to get it all cleaned up, and I'm trying to tell him what's going on, and you can tell he just doesn't even want to hear what I have to say. He's like, He's like, okay, well, let's go check your septic. I was like, well, I already snaked it from out there. He's like, okay, let's just walk out there real quick. So it's already opened up, like we just had the concrete lid on there. So we go out, and I lift up the concrete lid, and he just sticks his hand right in. He's got a glove on. He sticks his hand right in, and he pulls up. He goes, he's holding this big blue, like it's like that big. He's like holding this blue thing. He goes, well, that's your problem. Your filter's all clogged up. Who puts a filter in a septic, by the way? I was like, I didn't know there was a filter in my septic tank. He's like, yeah. He's like, all the newer systems, when I had an addition put on my house 2.5 years ago, they put a filter in my stupid septic. I don't know why we're filtering that, but whatever. And so he like holds it up and he goes, well, I'll tell you what. He was like, if you just rinse that off, he was like, I don't have to charge anything if you'll just rinse all that off. I don't want to have to do it. And I'm like, I mean, I get that. I've already done all the rest of it. And so I'm like rinsing off, and I was like, man, I was snaking it and plunging it. And he goes, well, you can snake it and plunge it and do all you want, but until you take care of that, you're going to have a big problem. Friends, that's what sin is. If you don't take care of the sin problem, which is what Christ is offering you, you're going to keep backing up. You see what I'm saying? You keep missing the main thing. You're going for everything else. You're fighting through all the muck. But the truth is that Jesus died for you. He was buried and he rose again. You put your faith in him and he saves you and he delivers you. You've been letting everything else distract you from the main thing, that Christ has died for you and he offers to save you. I got one last thing to point out to you. Look what happens. So he tells them that Christ died for them and Christ rose, and then look at what he says. By the way, I love the part about he rose when he says this. He gets into the Psalms in verse 35. This is Paul speaking to the synagogue. He says, he's quoting Psalms, and he says, you're my son, today I have begotten you. That's a psalm from 1,000 years before Jesus. It's pointing towards Jesus. And then he gives him another psalm. He says, I will give you the sure mercies of David. And then he gives him another one. He says, you will not allow your Holy One to see corruption. And Paul goes on to tell him, David did see corruption, didn't he? David, who wrote the psalm, saw corruption. He was buried and his body saw corruption. But Jesus Christ, they put him in a tomb and he rose again. He never saw corruption. Jesus didn't die a second time. Jesus rose from the grave and he ascended to the Father. And today he is there. And I need to shock you with this. There is a body in the presence of God this very day. It is his son Jesus. And you know what that means for me? That means that one day when he's promised me, he'll give me a resurrected body that can be in the presence of God. I can trust that because he fulfilled it himself. So here's the resurrected Christ. Now look though, you got to pay attention. Look what happens in verse 38. He says, therefore let it be known to you. This is Paul speaking to the synagogue. He says, let it be known to you, brethren, that through this man is preached the forgiveness of sins. That's what we just talked about. And by him, everyone who believes is justified from all things from which you could not be justified by the law of Moses. But pay attention, verse 40. Beware therefore, lest what has been spoken in the prophets come upon you. Behold, you despisers marvel and perish, for I work a work in your days, a work which you will by no means believe, though one were to declare it to you. Paul says to this synagogue, hey, you better be forewarned, because if you walk away from this and you don't believe it, just like the Jews didn't pay attention to the Old Testament, they didn't realize they were fulfilling the law when they crucified Christ. You know what else they said? You know what else the Bible says? You know what else the scriptures say? That there are going to be some of you who are going to reject it. That there are going to be some of you who reject the offer of salvation. Friends, I'm telling you right now, at the end of this sermon, God has made an offer to you. His offer is his own son, Jesus. He'll give you a completely new life in him if you'll put your faith in him. But the word says some of you are going to despise that. Some of you are going to walk away from that. And you're not going to believe. What did he say? Beware lest you become one of those. Friends, here's the altar call for you today. What's God calling you to? Listen, be forewarned. There's plenty of people. There's 300 plus people in this room today. Be forewarned. Some of you are going to leave here and you're not going to make a decision for the Lord. But that doesn't change his call on your life. He's been calling and he's been calling and he's been calling. I'm challenging you today. Everybody, let's stand up on our feet. Let's get the band to come forward. If the Lord's been calling you, don't be distracted by anything else. Here's your call right now. Are you listening? I'm talking to you. Here's your call. You've been drifted. God's calling you back. You've been wayward. God wants you back. You never knew God in the beginning. God's known you, and he wants you right now. This is your chance. I'm going to pray. I want you to do it even while I'm praying. We've got volunteers coming. Come over here and talk to one of our volunteers. If you need deliverance, if you want to be prayed for, if you're fighting demons, if you want to be delivered, if you want to be saved, if you want to be baptized, please come forward and come see us. We'll be over here. Pray with me right now. Heavenly Father, Lord, we ask you to take this time in the mighty name of Jesus. Father, I'm guilty of it. You call me and I let everything get in between. How many times do you have to take me to the bottom of the barrel so that I'll just quiet down and listen to you? Thank you, Father, that your mercy doesn't end at my stubbornness. God, would you take this time right now? Would you take this time of invitation? And would you call men and women unto yourself? Father, I pray for no more waiting. Father, I pray for you to turn hearts unto yourself. Let us be completely focused on you. Not just now, not just at invitation time. Father, I mean our whole lives. Father, I want to be dedicated to you. And I know there's others here that want to be dedicated to you. Reveal yourself to us. Work in a mighty way. Father, I pray for this time of invitation. Do with it whatever you please. You're King and Creator. You're God above all. We worship you and only you. Thank you for your Son, Jesus. Thank you for your deliverance. In Jesus' name, amen.